Welcome to today's custom-tailored deep dive.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here to jump into this one.
We have a seriously fascinating stack of study notes in front of us today for you, drawn specifically from the Holman Study Bible and the NAA Study Bible.
Right, two really rigorous sources.
Exactly. And our primary focus for you today is the original Hebrew context and the historical background of Genesis chapter 1.
Which is just a phenomenal topic. I mean, for anyone who has grown up hearing the creation account or even just absorbed it through cultural osmosis, the text can feel almost overly familiar.
Yeah, almost flat, right? Like you already know the whole story.
Exactly. But the goal today is to really dig into the actual historical and linguistic roots. We want to see what is really happening beneath the surface and understand how these specific words landed on their very first audience thousands of years ago.
Right, because our mission here is to move way past those basic summaries you might find in, children's Sunday school book. We want to uncover the profound discoveries hidden in the text. Because as our sources reveal, Genesis 1 wasn't just a simple, sterile timeline of events.
Yeah, not at all.
To its original ancient Near Eastern audience, it was a radically subversive text.
Yeah.
It was essentially, and this is wild to think about, a piece of cosmic propaganda designed to completely upend a deeply ingrained worldview.
It really was. I mean, it challenged absolutely everything the surrounding cultures believed about the universe, about the pantheon of gods they feared, and about humanity's actual place and value in the world.
So let's just start right at the very first sentence, Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
The classic opening.
Right. And the Holman notes point out something quite elegant right out of the gate regarding the grammar of the entire biblical text. God is established as the undeniable main character. In fact, grammatically speaking, the notes say God is the subject of more verbs than any other themes in the Bible.
Which sets the stage perfectly.
Right.
And the specific Hebrew verb used in that opening line is where the theology really begins.
The word for created, right?
Yeah, exactly. The word is bara. And the Holman study notes emphasize that in the biblical text, this specific verb is exclusively reserved for God.
That's fascinating.
It really is. You will never find a human being or even an angel performing the action of bara anywhere in the Hebrew Bible.
I noticed that in the notes, actually,
Yeah.
because unlike human creation, which relies entirely on a supply chain of pre-existing materials.
Right, we just modify things.
Exactly. The notes emphasize this verb implies creatio ex nihilo creation out of nothing. So God isn't presented as a cosmic architect, just rearranging pre-existing eternal matter.
No, he is entirely independent of raw materials. The universe is completely dependent on him for its very existence. He speaks, and the raw materials themselves come into being.
Wow.
And that establishes a hierarchy of power that the ancient world was simply not accustomed to.
I was looking at the notes on the word for God in this opening verse too, Elohim.
Oh yeah, the grammatical tension there.
Right, because it says it's a plural noun, but it's doing something weird grammatically with a singular verb, bara. You have a plural noun taking a singular verb. Can you explain what the Holman notes are pointing out here?
Yeah, it's a brilliant linguistic tension. The Holman notes synthesize a couple of distinct perspectives on this for us. On one hand, some scholars view this grammatical quirk as a plural of majesty.
Like the royal we.
Exactly. It's a linguistic tool to express God's supreme, limitless power and absolute greatness. Similar to how a historical monarch might refer to themselves as we. It encompasses all possible might and authority.
Okay, but the notes also mention a second perspective, which feels honestly like a massive Easter egg hidden right in the first sentence.
It really does. Many Bible scholars see this plural-singular dynamic as an early, mysterious hint at the complex nature of God.
A hint at the Trinity.
Right. It's viewed as a subtle linguistic foreshadowing of the Trinitarian nature of God plurality within a singular, unified essence. And this is happening long before those theological concepts were explicitly developed later in the biblical text.
It just leaves the reader with a sense of mystery about the Creator right from word 1.
Absolutely.
So if God is the ultimate unrivaled creator of matter in verse 1, that makes the state of the earth in verse 2 really puzzling.
Yeah, the transition there catches a lot of people off guard.
It's described with this famous, almost poetic Hebrew phrase, tohu vabohu, usually translated as formless and void. Now, looking at the study notes, there's a massive historical debate surrounding this phrase called the gap theory.
The famous gap theory.
Why did this theory become such a big deal for interpreters?
Well, the gap theory gained a lot of traction, particularly in older theological circles, because people were trying to reconcile the biblical text with two major things.
Okay.
First, the emerging scientific discoveries of deep geological time, and second, the theological question of when Satan actually fell.
So the idea is that maybe there was a massive gap of millions of years between verse 1 and verse 2.
Precisely. Some interpreters look at this formless and void state and see a chaotic ruin caused by a cosmic rebellion.
Like a war zone.
Right. The thought process is that God created a perfect earth in verse 1, Satan rebelled and destroyed it during that gap, and verse 2 is this post-apocalyptic wasteland that God has to step in and reconstruct.
Makes for a very dramatic narrative, I'll give it that.
It does. However, the study notes clarify where the linguistic evidence actually points, and it doesn't support that level of drama.
What does the Hebrew actually say then?
According to the grammatical construction of the Hebrew phrasing, it strongly favors the traditional translation. The earth didn't become formless and void through some off-screen catastrophe. It simply was formless and void.
So it's just describing an initial unformed state.
Exactly.
Less of a ruined battlefield and more of an unfinished canvas.
Think of a lump of clay waiting for the potter. It was a starting point, completely empty of life and lacking structural order. But the text doesn't leave us in that emptiness for long.
Right, because it goes on to say that darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters.
Yes.
Now, we really need to bring in the cultural context from the NAA Study Bible notes here, because to understand the weight of this imagery for the listener, you have to understand what Israel's neighbors believed about how the world started.
That is so crucial.
Can you paint a picture of the Babylonian worldview, specifically their creation myth, the Enuma Elish?
Sure. If you put yourself in the shoes of an ancient person living in the Near East, the world was a terrifying, unpredictable place.
The weather, famine, floods.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The surrounding cultures, like the Babylonians, believed that the universe was born out of intense, violent conflict among petty, warring gods. In the Enuma Elish, the world is only formed after the champion god, Marduk, engages in a brutal cosmic war against a terrifying, chaotic sea monster named Tiamat.
And the details of that myth are incredibly graphic.
Very graphic.
Marduk literally splits Tiamat's slain body in half to form the heavens and the earth. So in that worldview, humans are basically living inside the rotting corpse of a defeated sea monster, created merely to be slaves to the victorious gods.
It is a worldview rooted entirely in chaos and violence. But here is where the NAA notes point out a truly fascinating linguistic parallel.
Oh, right, the word for the deep.
Yes. The Hebrew word used in Genesis 1.2 for the deep is tiamam. And linguistically, Tiaham shares a root connection with the name of that Babylonian sea monster, Tiamat.
Wow. So when the ancient Israelites heard the word Tiaham, they would have immediately recognized the cultural echo.
We couldn't miss it.
They would hear the deep and instantly think of Tiamat, the terrifying dragon of chaos that their neighbors were utterly terrified of.
But look at the theological genius of Genesis here. In the biblical account, there is no cosmic battle. There is no struggle for supremacy. God does not have to fight the deep.
It's just water.
The deep is just water. It's an inanimate element of his creation.
There's no anxiety in the text at all. There's just this sovereign calm. The text says the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And the Holman notes mention that the specific verb for hovering is used elsewhere in the Bible to describe a bird.
Like an eagle.
Right, an eagle fluttering or hovering protectively over its young.
That image provides a breathtaking contrast. Instead of a war zone of clashing deities, you have the spirit of the one creator resting with absolute control and peaceful anticipation over the unformed world.
The chaos isn't an enemy to be defeated.
No, it's simply raw material waiting to be masterfully ordered.
So how does that calm, masterful ordering translate to the way the rest of the chapter unfolds? Because the NAA notes describe something called the framework hypothesis, which suggests these 6 days of creation are actually an incredibly elegant literary structure.
Yeah, the framework hypothesis is a game changer for how you read this. It shows us that the sequence isn't random. Remember the starting condition we just discussed, tohu, vabohu, unformed and unfilled?
Formless and void.
Exactly. God tackles this systematically. Days 1 through 3 are designed to solve the formless problem by giving the universe structure and distinct environments.
He's basically building the architectural blueprint.
Right.
Day 1, he separates light from darkness. Day 2, he separates the sky from the sea. Day 3, he separates the dry land from the waters and creates vegetation.
Perfect. Then, days 4 through 6 solve the void or unfilled problem by populating those exact environments, and he does it in the exact same sequence.
Okay, let's track that.
So, corresponding to day 1's light and dark, day 4 gives us the luminaries, the sun, moon, and stars. Corresponding to day 2's sky and sea, day 5 populates them with birds and fish. And corresponding to day 3's dry land, day 6 gives us the land, animals, and humanity.
The symmetry there is amazing. It portrays God as a master architect turning chaos into a beautifully functioning cosmos.
It really does.
But embedded within this elegant framework, the notes highlight a sharp, deliberate critique of the surrounding pagan cultures. Let's look at day 4 for a second.
Ah, yes, the luminaries.
God creates the sun and the moon. But the text intentionally refuses to use the actual Hebrew words for sun and moon. Instead, it just calls them the greater light and the lesser light.
Yep.
Wait, wouldn't refusing to use their names have been highly offensive to the Egyptians and Babylonians who worshipped them? Was this text essentially picking a theological fight?
It absolutely was. It's a direct insult. In the ancient Near East, the sun and the moon were worshipped as major, powerful deities. You had the Egyptian sun god Ra or the Babylonian moon god. These were supreme beings in their pantheons.
And Genesis just ignores their titles.
Completely. By refusing to even name them and merely calling them a greater light and a lesser light, Genesis essentially strips them of their personhood and their divinity.
It's like saying those aren't cosmic rulers. Those are just God's light bulbs.
That's exactly it.
The text says God created them merely to govern the day and the night and to serve as signs for seasons and days and years. He takes these ancient gods and turns them into chronological calendars.
It is a profound theological polemic. The biblical author is making it crystal clear to the reader that the natural forces that the surrounding nations worship in terror and awe are actually just inanimate objects.
They were created by the one true God to serve a specific practical function for humanity.
Right. They have no will, no divine power, and they certainly don't demand your worship or your sacrifices.
We see a very similar demotion happen on day 5 with the sea creatures. The text specifically mentions God creating the great sea creatures, or Tannanim in Hebrew.
Tannanim.
Now, to modern readers, that just sounds like God making some whales. But to Canaanite living back then, what did Tannanim represent?
To a Canaanite, the Tannanim were the stuff of nightmares. They were mythical sea dragons. They were symbols of primordial chaos and destruction, often seen as rival gods that had to be constantly appeased or fought off by the good deities.
It's like if a modern movie showed Godzilla, this ultimate terrifying force of nature, and God just treats him like a goldfish.
That is a great comparison. In Genesis 1, God doesn't fight them. He doesn't struggle against them. He simply speaks, and they exist.
The notes point out how casually Genesis strips all the power and fear away from these pagan mythologies.
This completely rewrote the worldview of the ancient Israelites. It freed them from the paralyzing fear of nature and capricious deities. It established a universe governed by a single, sovereign, purposeful creator who holds all things together.
Which brings us to the grand finale. The climax of this incredibly structured narrative arrives on day 6. God has prepared the environments, He has populated the skies and the seas, and now we get to Genesis 1.26. Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness.
The pinnacle of creation.
Can you explain the cultural context of the image of God from the NAA notes? Because this phrase carries a lot of historical baggage for the original audience.
It carries an immense amount of weight. In the ancient Near East, the phrase image of God was not something applied to the average person. It was an exclusive, highly guarded title reserved solely for the king.
So the Pharaoh in Egypt, or the king in Babylon, was considered the literal, physical embodiment of the God on earth.
Yes. They were the sole divine representatives. If you were a regular peasant farmer, you were essentially just a disposable asset, created to do the heavy lifting so the gods and the kings could rest.
The regular person had absolutely no inherent divine dignity in that system.
None at all. But Genesis does something radically, astonishingly democratic here. It claims that every single human being, male and female, is created in the image of God. Not just the elite, not just the royalty, but all of humanity.
It's democratizing the divine image. It's saying to the original readers, you are not an afterthought. You are not a slave to the cosmos. You carry the royal dignity of the Creator himself.
Every human is positioned as a vice-regent, a royal representative of God placed within the cosmic temple of creation to reflect his character and administer his rule. This fundamentally elevated the status of humanity above anything else found in the literature of the ancient world.
But that role comes with a specific job description. Which brings us to some words that have caused a fair bit of controversy over the years.
The commands to subdue and have dominion.
Yes, God tells humanity to subdue the earth, the Hebrew word kabosh, and to have dominion over the animals, the word rada. Now, to modern ears, subdue and dominion can sound really harsh. Is this text giving humanity a license for tyrannical exploitation of the planet?
That is a critical question, especially today. And the study notes strictly clarify this point. These commands are absolutely not a license for environmental destruction.
Okay, how should we read them then?
We have to view dominion through the lens of the one who gave the command. Since humanity is made in the image of a loving, orderly, and generous God, our dominion must reflect his specific type of dominion.
So it's a call to benevolent stewardship.
Precisely. Humans are meant to act as wise, caring rulers. We are tasked with developing the Earth's natural resources, cultivating its potential, and maintaining order, but always for the benefit of all creation and in service to the Creator. A good ancient king didn't destroy his own kingdom, he made it flourish.
There's a fascinating detail right at the end of the chapter that proves God's original intent wasn't about violence or exploitation. In verses 29 and 30, God prescribes the original diet for both humans and animals.
The vegetarian diet.
Right. And it is strictly vegetarian. They are given the seed-bearing plants and the fruit trees for food.
If we synthesize this with the whole narrative, it paints a profound picture of what the text calls a very good creation. Originally, in this uncorrupted state, there was no violence, no predation, and no death. The ecosystem functioned in perfect, peaceful harmony.
Which means that the violence, the survival of the fittest reality we see in the natural world today, wasn't part of the original blueprint.
The notes emphasize that this original harmony proves that the later introduction of evil, violence, and death into the world was an anomaly. It was a result of humanity's future rebellion and choice, as detailed later in the book of Genesis, not a flaw in God's original perfect design.
What we've seen today for you, our listener, diving into these study notes from the Holman and NAA Bibles, is that Genesis 1 is so much more than a simple timeline of how things got here.
So much more.
It is an incredibly elegant, highly structured masterpiece.
And a deeply subversive one. It systematically dismantled the fearful, chaotic, polytheistic worldview of the ancient Near East. It replaced rival gods with one sovereign creator who brings order through his mere spoken word.
It demoted the sun, the moon, and the terrifying sea monsters to just parts of the scenery. And most importantly, it granted unprecedented royal dignity to every single human being. It's a complete paradigm shift.
Which leaves us with a really compelling thought to consider as we wrap up today. We spent a lot of time talking about how human beings were given this royal dignity to create order out of chaos, mirroring the Creator. Yeah.
But if we look at our world today, especially with our rapidly advancing capabilities, things like artificial intelligence or even genetic engineering, we are wielding more creative power than ever before.
That's very true.
It begs the question for all of us. Are we using our image of God's status to bring life-giving, benevolent order to the world around us? Or, in our pursuit of progress, are we accidentally trying to build our own modern version of Babylonian chaos?
That is a heavy, fascinating angle to consider. The tools change, but the responsibility of that original mandate remains exactly the same for us today. Thank you so much for exploring these ancient texts and study notes with us today.